We are living through an unprecedented time right now, guys. Many of us are quarantined, many of us are stressed about finances, many of us are unsure of the future, and anxiety is at an all-time high. So today I wanted to do a different kind of episode. We've had a lot of women on this show talk about their personal struggles with anxiety and tactical tips on how to manage it. So I put together a series of clips that will help you understand and manage your anxiety better. So guys, lean in, take notes, and remember, we will get through this together. I'm Lisa Bilyeu, and I went from housewife to co-founder of the billion-dollar company Quest Nutrition, and now president of Impact Theory. Our mission with this show is to empower you and all women to recognize that you really can become the hero of your own life. Welcome to Women of Impact. Nicole LePera shares why improving your gut health may improve your anxiety. How much does health and nutrition to you play in this? Because understanding our thoughts, everything you've broken down is so amazing, but I do think that there's that other component, which I know you've gone through and me too, is the importance of sleep, nutrition, all of that. Explain that to me and why people don't think about it as being part of their evolution of getting stronger, getting more confident. But I think it's one of the most fundamental things.
Yeah, I think it's everything important because it gives our body a physiologically balanced base so that we can start to navigate our mind differently because the mind and the body are connected, right? So there is no separation. The brain is an organ that lives in the body. So the health of the body is going to impact the health of the brain. And in the mind, what we're worried about, our thoughts, our mental clarity, our attention, some of the symptoms that we're struggling, if we're struggling with mental wellness, are all going to be impacted then by the health of the body. And for me, when I started to consider my nutrition and make some changes, it was when I was able to be in a more balanced body that then gave me the tools, in a sense, or enhance the tools of meditation and breath work and all of that. Because in our gut, not only is it where the nutrients are being absorbed, that our brain is the most in need of calories and nutrients to function. So if we have a damaged gut, we're not going to be getting the nutrients to our brain, and our cognition might start to slow, and our energy and sleep is an incredibly important system. Most of us don't get enough sleep. All of that is in service of making sure that our brain is as healthy as possible, and that starts with nutrition. Even furthermore, we now know that these neurotransmitters that we've all thought for so long were produced in the brain and contained to the brain, the serotonins, the dopamines, essentially all that is kind of imbalanced when we're struggling with depression and anxiety, are actually manufactured in our gut as well. So again, if our guts aren't functioning properly, our brain isn't going to function properly. And so if we begin to heal our guts by first, the way I see it, removing the gut damaging foods, making sure we're getting a lot of nutrient dense food that we are eating, before we know it, some, if not all, of our symptoms actually might go away. And it wasn't until I got my nutrition in order and then I became much more consistent with my meditation, with my breath work, and then really started to explore my own inner child wounds that I was able to heal. But I don't think, honestly, without making sure that my body was balanced, I don't know how successful my healing would have been.
Yeah, I thought it was total woo-woo. So I've been sick now for about 4 years, been struggling with my gut health issues. And initially I was going to all the very traditional doctors. And after a while, someone kept saying to me, well, maybe you need to see a more holistic approach. And the first thing someone said to me is stop working when you eat. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, just stressing yourself out so much. And at that point, I was so desperate for an answer that I was like, it's woo-woo, but sure, I'll try it. And that's where I saw massive radical change in me, and for the better. And I know that you have mentioned that you became very forgetful, you would forget things mid-sentence. And I've always said that I'm going to be the person that's always very honest. And I've actually been on this show in days where I've noticed that I'm very tired, that my stomach is hurting a lot, which means I can't eat much. And so I was in an interview and I forgot the question I was asking as I was asking it. And that was one of those moments that was very heartbreaking for me. I felt like, oh my God, am I not a good host anymore? Like, we need to cut it out. I was so embarrassed. But in hearing everything that you're saying and things that I'm learning on the side of the gut, brain-gut connection, it's just like, wow, my my health really had that impact on the brain and how I was performing.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think the reality of it is, societally, some of these gut damaging foods are so prolific. They are in everything. So first and foremost, just becoming educated and starting to be a conscious consumer, reading labels and really showing each and every one of us how present these particular items are in the daily choices that we're making, especially if you're going to the McDonald's or the fast foods. I mean, they are using not only the oils, I mean, some of the products, and if you're doing that multiple times a week, before you know it, you're really going to be accumulating some problems in your gut. And I was that person, even though I would go and pick what I thought were the healthier options, living in cities my whole life, you know, food at my fingertips, you know, I was eating way less healthy than I think I intended, and I didn't know. I wasn't aware. So I often suggest being conscious about your food choices, but then starting to do some self-experimentation. So I didn't even know I could feel better until I started to remove some of these, and then I felt how I felt, and I was like, oh wow, my sleep is getting better. My cognition's getting a bit clearer. My attention, I have a little bit more choice about where I put my attention now. I'm not as feeling as emotionally reactive. That's another symptom, sometimes for a lot of us, on either gut damage or blood sugar dysregulation. Riding that emotional roller coaster really can originate in our guts. And I didn't know. So I removed some things, and then I saw that my health was improving.
Vanessa Van Edwards shares how you can trick yourself into feeling excited.
So another study, what they did was they wanted to look at anxiety. And when we're talking about awkwardness, I think that some very similar kind of feelings in there. Anxious, awkward, shy. What this study did is they wanted to know that exact question. Is what do you do if you are anxious, but you gotta fake it?
Right.
You gotta find confidence.
Right.
They didn't use the word fake it.
Right.
So what they realized was that anxiety and anxiousness is a sister emotion to excitement. Okay, so when you think about when you're anxious, what happens in your body? You get little butterflies in your stomach, you start to kind of sweat, you get a little bit of dry mouth, you feel a little bit hot and sweaty. That's anxious.
Your heart's like
Your
doing
heart's going.
palpitations.
Now explain excitement to me.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Exactly the same.
Yeah.
In your body,
Yeah.
anxiety and excitement feel very similar. The cousin or sister emotion, is there a way to reframe how you're viewing your own anxiety as potential excitement? And here's what they did. They took people and they had them come into the lab and they gave them a task. And the task was cruel, in my opinion.
What was it?
They had them sing Don't Stop Believing into a karaoke machine. So they were rated for their accuracy of words, accuracy of notes, accuracy of lyrics, like
God.
high pressure. I know.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's see, I think if I can get the numbers right. So they had them sing this karaoke song, but they had 3 different groups.
Okay.
The first group walked in, sung the song, done. Control group. Second group walked in and they had to say, I'm anxious, out loud, and then sing. And the last group had to say, I'm excited, and then sing the song. That's it. No prep, no mental nothing, just saying those words. Of course, the I'm excited group outperformed, outsung, and actually enjoyed the experience more than the group that just said, I'm anxious. This is, I think, such good news. It means that we are in control of how we view our own anxiety, our own awkwardness. The opening line of this book, which, by the way, when I first submitted this book to my publisher, my whole introduction was about, science and data and, all these impressive things. And she's like, Vanessa, this isn't you.
That's amazing.
She's like, can you start with something more vulnerable? She's like, what's the thing that you're most afraid of that readers are going to see about this book? And I'm like, I'm afraid that they're going to read this book and think, why would I learn about charisma from an awkward person? She's like, that's exactly why they want to learn from you. So the opening line of the book is, my name is Vanessa and I'm a recovering awkward person. It's the most vulnerable thing I could think of. And instead of for years in my business, I hid it. I hid it under the guise of being an expert, a scientist, a journalist. And the moment that I began to put my awkwardness forward as a flip side, where I view my awkwardness as a very powerful vulnerability, I do not view my awkwardness as a liability anymore. And I would say the same thing. If you're anxious or you're nervous or you're lacking confidence, what is the flip side to that? Is it that your anxiousness could be excitement? Use that adrenaline. Is it that your awkwardness could be a real vulnerability to find other fellow recovering awkward people?
Right.
That was why this book did well. I think it was that opening line. That was why in my videos, I decided to put my awkwardness forward. It's the same thing. I don't want you to fake it till you make it. I want you to show up anxious and awkward and learn how to use it.
And that is what gravitated me towards you in the book
Yeah.
in the first place. Because you almost don't want to look up to someone saying they've got it all, they're perfect.
Right.
I want to look at the awkward person and say, how did she get out of it?
Yeah.
Because clearly it's worked once.
Right. And every time I do it, it works again and again.
Right.
So the funny thing is, for a long time, I was trying to grow my business, trying to grow my brand, and trying to be the expert, have it all together, be perfect, be Wonder Woman. And it wasn't until I started to learn that actually it was the opposite of that. And I learned it really silly. I was posting on Instagram and I posted a picture of me surfing, not well, but me surfing, me up, standing up.
Okay.
And the funny thing is the photographer for the little surf school had 2 pictures, one of me surfing and the very next one was of me face planting into the water, okay? So I was like, this isn't real. I'm gonna post the face plant. So 5 minutes later, I posted the face plant. The face plant, of course, got so many more likes, so many more reach outs. And I realized then and there, actually, that photo, I was like, what am I doing on Instagram? Like, what am I doing with my brand? Like, why am I trying to hide the falls? And I think of it, have you heard of like the swan theory? Have you ever heard this idea?
No.
So I heard this idea so resonated with me, which when you look at a swan on a lake, it looks so peaceful, right? The swan is beautiful and elegant and gliding and everything's great and perfect, right? Yeah. But underneath the water, the swan is like, like paddling
for life,
furiously.
yeah.
It's murky under there. The water is kind of dirty. They're paddling for their life. And I was like, that at least feels like me, or I don't know most other female business owners I know, where we're trying to be this perfect swan, right? But underneath it all, we're wearing Spanx, we're trying to hold it in, we're paddling for our lives. And I was like, why aren't we talking about the murk? Why aren't we talking about the chaos? Why aren't we talking about the paddling for our lives? So that when I go to a networking event, I walk in and I feel a little awkward. Yeah. I walk in and I'm like, oh, there's the cool kids, and I'm going the other way.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Do you still do that now?
Yes.
Interesting.
And I think that it's so unfair to say to people, oh no, I never feel awkward. I'm done feeling awkward. And that's unfortunately what we do, I think, a lot of the times as women, is we set ourselves up to think, oh yeah, I have it all figured out. I never feel nervous. I never feel anxious. I'm confident all the time. So the flip side of trying to show up confident is also, how do we say, yeah, I can be confident, but I also had to really work to get it.
Sean Korn shares how yoga can actually relieve anxiety.
I didn't know I had obsessive compulsive disorder when I was a child, because it wasn't something that, my parents wouldn't have taken me to a therapist. We didn't come from that kind of an environment. You just kind of got over it. And it just wasn't a diagnosis until later on. I knew I had quirky behaviors. They weren't unmanageable, but when I was uncomfortable, I would do things in patterns of 4s or 8s, whether it was blinking, swallowing, walking into walls. If someone touched me on one side, they have to touch me on the other side. And as long as I did these patterns, I would feel good in my body. If something happened in an odd number, and I was conscious of it, the anxiety, again, what I know today as being anxiety, would get worse and worse. And it was also coupled with superstition, meaning that if I didn't do the patterns in certain ways, that I was always afraid that someone I loved would die or get sick, and that it would be my responsibility. And so it became very important that I patterned, is what I called it, to make sure that everyone around me stayed safe. And it was something that really depended on how elevated my stress levels were. But again, I couldn't have known that, understood that pattern.
Is it the control factor? Is that what?
Well, yes, of course. For me, it was, I dealt with as I write about in the book, I dealt with childhood sexual trauma at 6 years old. And my obsessive compulsive disorder began shortly after that. What had happened to me took agency from my body, from my voice, from my choice. And I recognize now that when I would pattern, I could create control around my body. It's the only thing I had. And it's the only thing I could do to make my body feel contained and feel safe. My patterning, especially in even numbers, was a way for me to create balance and harmony in what I knew to be a chaotic world. And in the moment of trauma and the chemicals releasing into your body, there's a contraction that happens in order to create a sense of safety. So the body contracts, and in that moment, that trauma has been imprinted in the cells. So as I get older, that contraction, that tension actually feels safe. Anytime that there's a release of that tension, I don't know what's on the other side of that tension. There's no evidence that it's a good thing. And so my big feelings, when tension would start to release, big feelings would come up. And in life, when big feelings come up, if we don't know how to manage them, we might turn to food or sex or drugs or alcohol or the internet or shopping, whatever it might be, to anesthetize or numb out from the bigger feelings. I didn't have access to that when I was 7 years old. So patterning became my drug of choice. It made me feel better. In the same way a drink might or drugs might, for a split second, it helped to diffuse the emotion that was the core of that anxiety. And so when I moved away from home and away from my support system, especially my mother, my anxiety got worse and my patterning got worse. But at this point, I'm now doing drugs. But I also simultaneously was able to discover yoga and meditation and therapy. And I straddled two worlds for a while. One world where I had access to all the drugs and alcohol that I wanted or needed, and the other world where I was being introduced into these different ideas. And so thankfully, one side took over more, and it helped me to pull out of some of those habits before they became chronic. Now, I hadn't gotten to the core of my wounding yet, not even close, but yoga and meditation and pranayama breathing techniques, they were helping me to self-regulate and not need to want to anesthetize myself with drugs or alcohol. It allowed me to stay a little bit more present to my big feelings without being overwhelmed by them. And in time, was able to learn skills to help me to, at first, just manage my obsessive compulsive disorder, help me to manage the anxiety, and in time, help me to understand how the anxiety got there in the first place, because that's key. It helped me to move through the anger, which was what drugs and alcohol were trying to mask, so that I can get to what was underneath the anger, which was grief. And no amount of anything can heal you more than really connecting with your deepest vulnerability, because that's the access point to surrender, and surrender is what opens us up to God.
Yeah. I want to talk about that first step into yoga, because I heard you say that it actually caused you more anxiety initially. So what allowed you to keep going? Because if I'm thinking, okay, I've got anxiety and I go do yoga, I just try it out, and it actually heightens it. My instinct, right, is to run. It's like, I'm never doing that again. That makes it worse, because I think that people do that. They want to play it safe, to feel secure, to feel safe. So what kept you going? And actually explain how it gave you more anxiety, and then take me through the steps.
Well, as a teacher, I watch it all the time. And what students don't often understand is that it's part of the process, the discomfort. It's part of their own personal evolution. They can't get to the other side of it until they go through it. So teachers would say things like, focus on the sensation. So I started to notice that my anxiety has a sensation attached to it. My heart would beat fast. My face would get red. My breath would get really short. I'd feel hot. I'd feel fidgety. Those were sensations that let me know that I'm having anxiety. It's like, okay, I can be with that. And so breathing and self-regulating was the way in which I was able to manage the impulse. But that's not enough. I had to find out where what was the core of it. Now, of course, the core was trauma. I didn't associate myself with someone who had trauma, but I did. And this was the way in which my particular nervous system responded to it, was by going into this energetic lockdown and dissociating, disconnecting from my body, and needing patterning as a way to feel in control. And so it was, I kept going to yoga. I kept taking more and more classes because it was helping me to manage the OCD. And then therapy helped me to understand its core.
So take me through the unraveling then of the trauma, because recently I had a guest on and it blew my mind, because I always think of trauma as being very big, right? It's like you've been sexually abused, you've been kidnapped, I mean like massive things. So I never thought of like myself as having trauma, or really other people that I know like having trauma, and they broke it down. And I heard you say the same thing, as like everyone has some form of trauma. So talk to me about you discovering that you had trauma and how other people at home can start to identify that.
Trauma is anything that overwhelms our capacity to cope and leaves us feeling helpless, hopeless, out of control, or unable to respond. What might be traumatic for me might not be traumatic for you at all, and vice versa. Bullying, death of a loved one, divorce, these are traumas that can have a huge impact, especially when you're a child. So there's shock trauma. Those are those usually one-offs, those unimaginable moments that just pull the rug right out from underneath you. But developmental trauma is different. And all of us experience it. And it's usually when we don't have the words to express our big feelings. You see, emotion is, everything is energy. You know, energy is defined as vibration with information. But there's subtle energy, and subtle energy you cannot see, but you can feel. Love, joy, these are subtle energies. But so is shame, fear, rage, guilt, grief, what they call the shadow emotions. So when you experience trauma, there's always going to be a shadow emotion that's attached to it, usually many of them. So you experience this trauma, bullying, you know, you're ashamed, you're angry, you're afraid. Remember that what I said before, it's like your brain releases chemicals, you go into fight, flight, freeze, or collapse, there's that contraction. If you were raised in an environment where your parents recognize, or who's ever raising you, recognize like, okay, there's been, this child is overwhelmed, they look like they might be in shutdown, let's give them a space to express those big feelings. Maybe they pick up a tennis racket and they beat a pillow. Maybe they journal write and use whatever language they want. They let the animal energy out of them. When they do that, they discharge the energy, and they're able to get to what's underneath the rage and the fear and the shame, which is grief. Most people weren't raised in that kind of an environment. This is what might happen. You know, big feeling comes up and parents said, oh God, you're sad or you're scared. Here, have a cookie. Or you're angry, come on, let's go shopping. I'll buy you a little present.
You're fine.
Yep.
Worse has happened.
Yep. And, or I'll give you something to be sad about.
Right.
And so what they're taught is to suppress it. So you take that anger, you take that rage, you take that shame, and you suppress it into the body. That suppressed emotion, it becomes tension, that contraction. Tension, stress, and anxiety are the #1 causes of illness and depression.
Ashley Stuhl shares why being uncomfortable is necessary.
And that's the thing about anxiety, is what I've learned with my own anxiety and having healed from so much of it is that I don't think the truth and anxiety coexist. I think you can have pain with the truth, but usually anxiety is just feedback that you're not connected or you're not listening to something. And I think a lot of people aren't in touch with their pain. And so they think that they say, I'm fine, I'm comfortable, I should be so grateful. They tell themselves all these stories to keep themselves where they are, because the only thing worse is going into the unknown at that moment for them. Whereas for me, I've learned not to be comfortable with lukewarm and to see that as an indicator. And so my opinion, it's who you are always wins. The truth always wins. And I think a lot of people have this false notion that they're moving forward and advancing. Like, for example, I have a girlfriend who's single and she's really bummed out about it. She really thrives in partnership. And she was looking at a couple friends of mine saying, like, look at what they have, they're married. I know those people very well, and I happen to know they're not happy. I think, like, at the end of the day, so many people aren't willing to listen. And what I've found is some of the biggest decisions I've made, whether it's letting go of working in counterterrorism, having a management role, doing really well in the workforce, not really knowing if things were going to work out for me as an entrepreneur, or calling off my wedding. I was with an amazing guy for 5 years, and I totally could have married him and had a really nice life. And it's just one of those things where when you admit to yourself that something's not working, and that's why I'm writing my book, U-Turn, because it's all about turning back to yourself. And it's like when you're willing to do that, it's painful, but it's not as painful as going to bed every night with anxiety for years on end because you're not listening. And it's like pushing a beach ball under the ocean. It's tiring, you know? So for me, for those people who are actually saying, I'm scared I'm going to fail, to me, like my perception, nobody's a failure. I don't believe anybody to be a failure, but you're already failing if you feel that disconnected and you're not connecting to your pain, because who you are always wins. It's going to come out anyway. Ask yourself, where am I comfortable right now? Where am I doing exceedingly well, and where do I feel comfortable? Are you actually comfortable, or are you secretly miserable?
And what does comfort mean, though?
Yeah, it's personal, right? There's 3 things that happen, right? There's creation, maintenance, and destruction, and you're always around the corner from each one, right? So it's like you're either creating, you're maintaining, or it's about to fall apart because it doesn't work for you anymore.
And most people just stay at the maintaining. Yeah.
Exactly.
Toba Gonzalez shares why you have to feel your fear and do it anyway.
I mean, I'll notice myself getting really kind of anxious and uncomfortable when I am feeling like I am not in control of something. For instance, I have this odd fear of driving on the freeway, which is so weird. I mean, in California, it's like the worst fear to have because everybody's like just crazy.
You can't go anywhere.
Can't
if you
go
don't get on the
anywhere.
freeway.
No. But I'm like, why in the world would I be afraid to get in the car on the highway?
Always.
No, just randomly, this just random fear popped up out of nowhere.
Recently.
And I went to therapy, and they said that, you know, sometimes our trauma surfaces in different ways. It could be a fear of, I don't know, of being alone, or a fear of, you know, making social anxiety, all those kinds of things. For me, it was the freeway, and I don't know what nothing's ever happened to me on the freeway. I don't know what that is, but for whatever reason, there's some sort of little.
So do you think it is the control thing? Whereas like you can be in control as much as possible, but it just takes one driver out of control to change that.
Yes. I feel like it's trusting the drivers around me. So I think it obviously comes from a lack of trust in an environment, maybe possibly from when I was a child.
So have you got some things that you're doing to like overcome that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for most people who have anxiety in any situation, have to keep it going from a 1 to 100.
Right.
And I like to stop it at about a 5. So by trying to, I don't know, think about something that I have to do that will completely take my mind off of the anxiety itself is the only way I can get through it. So
Really, like distract yourself?
complete distraction
Really?
is the only way.
And if you go back to it, does it then the anxiety go away, or it resurfaces every time you go back to thinking about it?
It goes away.
Okay.
And it's also just doing it, going through your fear.
Yeah.
So I can't just not get on the freeway forever, because then, you know, I'll never drive on the freeway.
Right.
So forcing myself to get up and drive and go do it, palms sweaty, anxiety, and just doing it. And then afterwards feeling really proud of myself, like, okay, sounds so stupid, but I drove on the freeway for 3 miles.
But it's not stupid, because it's
Right.
really about the fear that you've overcome
Right.
than it is the driving itself.
Small feet.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a strange thing.
And I know you love Mel Robbins.
I do.
So Mel Robbins, I don't know if you've heard the example that she gave, where anxiety and excitement actually showcase in your body the same thing. You get like your heart starts racing a little, your palms start sweating
Yeah.
a little. And so your brain doesn't necessarily know which one you're experiencing. So if you're feeling anxiety, she said just switch the voice in your head and say, I'm excited. So instead of focusing on like, oh crap, I've got anxiety, reframe it and say, I'm excited to get on the freeway. I'm excited to get on the freeway.
I love that.
I'm excited to get on the freeway. Because
Yes.
you're reinforcing in your brain why you're feeling the heart palpitations and the sweaty palms. And so I've literally now used it, like, I'll just say, like, I'm excited to do this. And it's like, you've got to force yourself because it doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, 100%.
But it's just that little framing in your mind that I've just found fascinating.
Isn't it interesting that your brain doesn't know whether or not you're telling it a lie or not? It just knows and believes whatever you say, whatever you tell it.
Yeah.
So like you said, if you keep saying, I love driving on the freeway, this is so fun, this is so exciting, your brain's gonna go, really?
Yeah.
Okay, maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, that's the hope, right? That you do it enough, it creates those kind of mental habits.
Yeah, because that habit loop, that could be so effective,
Yeah.
also dangerous, depending on what the habit is that you have.
Yeah, be careful how you talk to yourself, right?
All right, guys, I really hope that this episode brought you value and gave you tips and strategies to help manage your anxiety. If this did bring you value, please do click that subscribe button down there. And if you're not following me, follow me at Lisa Bilyeu. And until next time, guys, really do be the hero of your own life. Peace out. What up, guys? Lisa here. Thanks so much for watching this episode. And if you haven't already subscribed, click that little button right in front of you. Click, click, click away. We release episodes every Wednesday, so be sure to get notified. Till next time, go be the hero of your own life.